Facebook didn't inform the public about Cambridge Analytica's access to 50 million profiles.
Political consulting firm harvested data from tens of millions.
Social media giant attempted to conceal meddling by Russia on its platform.
The site has been used to incite violence against Rohingya refugees.
The hashtag delete Facebook is trending on Twitter.
Hello, I'm Richard Gizbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the media stories that we're covering this week. Facebook's 2018. Its year in review is not a pretty picture. There's a lot not to like. 480 news outlets in Hungary are consolidated, all under one roof, and the regulators just look the other way. Activists armed with cameras are documenting the way the American authorities go after undocumented immigrants. And a rhapsody reworked for the social media generation. No complaints about liberty. New Year's resolutions are tricky. Promises of performance can prove difficult to keep. But that did not stop Facebook's CEO Mark Zuckerberg vowing at the outset of 2018 that this would be the year that he would fix things, that his company would start protecting its users from abuse and hate, defend them against interference by nation-states and bad political actors, and make sure, as he put it, that going on Facebook would be time well spent. Since then, multiple controversies and unfavorable news stories, including the Cambridge Analytica data breach and the UN's report on Facebook's role in ethnic cleansing in Myanmar, have exposed some of the pragmatic business calculations the company has made. They've also provided a glimpse into how Facebook goes after its critics, and they put the lie to the feel-good image that the company has worked so hard to sell. It'll be interesting to see what kind of New Year's message Zuckerberg comes up with a couple of weeks from now. Our starting point this week is Facebook's California headquarters in Silicon Valley, USA. Facebook released its 2018 year in review last week, marking various global events, the elections, celebrity weddings, and sporting occasions that drove engagement on the site. What it did not look at was itself, the kind of year Facebook had, which might have been time better spent.
I would have started with the Cambridge Analytica story, in which this company run by a bunch of Bond villains had sensitive data from untold numbers of Facebook users around the world to coerce people and move elections. That's only the start. I would have had clips of refugees in Myanmar driven out by the worst sort of propaganda spread by the government of Myanmar and many religious leaders explicitly using Facebook to foster genocide. Then I would have gone through all of the stammering that Mark Zuckerberg committed.
No.
While testifying before various committees, the level of scrutiny.
Is Facebook too powerful?
The level of criticism.
The purpose of that user agreement is to cover Facebook's rear end.
And then I would have finished with the embarrassing revelations that Facebook itself has paid political operatives to engage in the spread of the very kind of propaganda that people have been accusing Facebook of fostering. It's been a stunning year for Facebook.
And all of that came after the New Year's message Zuckerberg posted in January, in which he admitted Facebook had a lot of work to do. The company was dealing with the hate speech and misinformation rampaging across the social media network. And there was the aftermath of the 2016 US election, when Facebook was accused of enabling Russian operatives out to meddle in American democracy. The public noises Zuckerberg and his number two, Sheryl Sandberg, were making were along the lines of, "We're trying, doing our best."
And we have a lot more to do here.
Statements that after the Cambridge Analytica data breach story came out in March no longer passed the smell test.
The Cambridge Analytica scandal is not quite what people think it is. That scandal is about how a company used Facebook exactly as intended. Cambridge Analytica are not the only people that are downloading Facebook data, using it to micro-target people in order to go back and send more advertisements to get people's attention on Facebook. Because this is their very core business model. This is what advertising is.
For all the attention that Cambridge Analytica and Russian disinformation has gotten in the US and the UK, for me the real impact that Facebook has had in 2018 is in developing areas of the world. Myanmar is the one that has got the most attention, and we've seen there how Facebook has been weaponized, and the government and the army have spread hate speech against the Rohingya Muslims, which has incited violence. Now, Facebook repeatedly told us that they're doing more, they're hiring more people, but they still don't have a full-time employee in Myanmar.
Facebook suffered another reputational blow last month, the latest of many, at the hands of the New York Times. Based on leaked internal communications, the Times reported that Facebook had hired a Washington-based PR firm called Definers to investigate and smear some of Facebook's critics. That did not exactly square with Zuckerberg's sugary words.
Connecting people, building community, and bringing the world closer together.
One of those critics was George Soros, who, in addition to being a powerful individual, is also a lightning rod for right-wing movements. He's obviously a billionaire investor, but he's also, to the right wing, sort of a symbol of Jewish power. And so the idea that Facebook was looking into George Soros really played into one of those powerful emotional narratives and made the company really look bad.
The report spoke to a certain level of chaos within the company. Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg came out and said they didn't realize that the company had hired Definers. Ultimately, Elliot Schrage, who's a departing head of communications, he put his hands up and he said it was his fault. But it just added to the sense that Facebook was a company that you couldn't really trust, and that they were doing things that Facebook shouldn't really be doing.
Trust, when dealing with the news media, must be earned. And Facebook's corporate culture, when dealing with journalists asking troublesome questions, seems to be rooted in avoidance, batting away stories, refusing to answer on the record, then finding itself on the defensive when the story comes out anyway. In the case of the Cambridge Analytica data breach, Facebook tried to ignore the questions. Then, after The Observer published the story, Mark Zuckerberg went on CNN to do the talking.
Mark, what happened? What went wrong?
Zuckerberg is a self-described geek.
Well, it's hard to know what we'll find, but we're going to review thousands of apps.
As a television performer, he's not exactly killing it.
I think Facebook was caught flat-footed, was used to getting a relatively favorable reception from the press. And after Cambridge Analytica, the public and the media changed their tune, and that lack of being able to see itself the way the world did certainly hampered Facebook throughout 2018, as it tended to underreact, under-anticipate the level of scrutiny that it would get.
The bottom line on Facebook will always be the numbers, and they're mixed. It has 2.2 billion users worldwide and is still growing in Asia and Africa. However, growth is stagnant in Europe and the Americas, where most of the revenues come from, and that has shaved about $1.2 billion off Facebook's share value, a drop of about 30%. The real threat to Facebook, though, the one Mark Zuckerberg must be thinking about, comes from governments and their regulators. They have been as slow to react to the Facebook problem as the company has, but more and more of them are talking about and inching towards reining in the social media giant.
The only potentially effective regulatory action I've seen against Facebook has come out of the European Union with the introduction in 2018 of the General Data Protection Regulation. The very fact that now companies that take our data have to allow European citizens to explicitly offer their permission for the use of the data, I think is crucial. Those are important rights that I wish the rest of the world had.
Across the water in the US, the regulators had a much more hands-off approach compared to their EU counterparts, but that could all change because with the switch in the House in Washington come January, we may see Democrats want to pursue a more aggressive approach against these companies, especially over the Russia disinformation campaign, which is still a huge issue. And I think that ultimately we're going to see regulators clamp down on Facebook much, much heavier in 2019.
What we're seeing is governments are trying to flex their muscles. And we're going to see ever more examples of governments cracking down on this. And I imagine within the next year, we'll probably see the first example of a government just outright shutting down Facebook in that country and seeing what happens. I don't know which country it'll be or how long it'll be for, but I imagine some government is going to want to test their resolve relative to Facebook, and that will be interesting.
We're looking at other media stories on our radar this week with one of our producers, Will Yong. Will, we've reported on Hungary before and how much media consolidation has occurred there under Prime Minister Viktor Orban. But 480 separate news outlets now merged into one single entity?
Yes, it's called the Central European Press and Media Foundation, and it's headed by the media mogul Gábor Liszkai, who's a close ally of Prime Minister Orban. That's hundreds of TV and radio stations, magazines, newspapers, including all of Hungary's regional newspapers, all handed over by their owners as charitable donations, free of charge. The political pitch for this is that newspapers are struggling economically, so consolidation will help them to survive. But many of the previously independent outlets that have been handed over were struggling because the government was starving them of advertising revenues, which enabled the Prime Minister's allies to buy them on the cheap. And here's the kicker. Although the government has blocked media mergers before on competition grounds, Orban has decreed that this conglomerate not be investigated by the competition authority because the merger is of national strategic importance.
Among the questions that this raises, then, is what's the effect going to be on news content in Hungary, and what political opposition exists there to this move, if any?
Well, observers say this is about politics first and cost-cutting second, and that Hungarians will be seeing more shared content and less diversity in their journalism. The opposition Socialist Party says it will sue Hungary's Media Council, which is also controlled by Orban, and they are also looking for outside help from Brussels. But the EU has a pretty poor track record on intervening when it comes to member states and what governments do on the media side. Orban knows that and is probably counting on it.
And Time magazine has announced its Person of the Year for 2018, collectively honouring journalists under fire. Who's on that list, and why the subsequent debate online?
Well, there are 4 front covers for this week's Time, 4 different individuals or groups. The Capital Gazette newspaper in the US state of Maryland, where 5 staff were killed by a gunman back in June. The wives of Reuters journalists in Myanmar, Wallon and Jor Soeu, the 2 men have been in jail for a year now. Maria Ressa from Rappler, who faces dubious tax fraud charges in the Philippines after years of hard-hitting reporting of the presidency of Rodrigo Duterte. And the late Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who Time describes as a lifelong defender of the truth, though the reality is that Khashoggi spent most of his career propagandizing for the ruling family in Riyadh before he took sides against Mohammed bin Salman when the Crown Prince rose to power. Time calls the 4 cases representative of a broader fight around the world in which at least 52 journalists have been killed this year. And while it did mention reporters that have been killed in India and the case of Russian journalist Arkady Babchenko, who misled the world by faking his death, it was up to Twitter to point out that 2 Palestinian journalists, Yasser Murtaja and Ahmed Abu Hussein, who were shot and killed by Israeli snipers while covering the protests in Gaza, they were absent from Time's list.
OK, thanks, Will. Before President Trump took office, most media junkies in the U.S. would not have known that ICE stands for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. But the Trump administration's hardline immigration policies have changed all that. Data published this past week shows that in the past year, ICE arrests in the workplace have gone up by more than 600%. And with the president's ceaseless talking and tweeting about threats like a government shutdown if Democrats refuse to fund his border wall, or that migrant caravan from Honduras, stories about ICE and its sister agency, CBP, Customs and Border Protection, are right up there on the mainstream media's agenda. But some news organizations are doing more than just covering the story. Over the past year, NGOs and legal advocacy groups have collaborated with media outlets to, at the grassroots level, track cases of enforcement abuse. And they train communities to use their own media tools to document wrongdoing. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now from Texas on some of the media practices and stories that have come out of those collaborations.
They're known as ICE raids, seemingly indiscriminate, often undercover operations to root out illegal immigrants. And they happen across the US, day in, day out. Like the case of Perla Morales Luna, a mother taken in front of her screaming children on a Southern California street in March 2018. Or Juan Hernandez, a mechanic in Los Angeles, arrested at work in September 2017, even though agents had no probable cause or warrant. Or Romulo Avlica Gonzalez, a father of 4, apprehended in February 2017 while dropping his daughter at school. Just 3 examples of thousands. We know about these 3 because they were caught on camera.
Eyewitness footage has been so crucial in exposing ICE's manipulative tactics. Romulo Avlica Gonzalez was arrested by 2 ICE agents who were in unmarked vehicles wearing jackets that only said police, but there's a reason why they don't identify themselves. They're trying to use manipulative tactics to get information from immigrants or people who they've racially profiled in order to arrest and deport them. This happened in February of 2017, and it was really the first high-profile case that really showed what the human price of ICE's new enforcement looked like.
US Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, is not a new body. Its current incarnation, the largest investigative arm of the Department of Homeland Security, was part of a restructuring effort in the wake of 9/11. And it's not as though the Obama administration didn't deport undocumented workers, as many as 20,000 a month by 2016. But Donald Trump has gone further. During his first week in office, the president signed an executive order that rewrote the rules on who ICE should prioritize in its operations, making virtually every undocumented immigrant in the country, all 10.7 million, fair game for arrest and deportation, whether they had a criminal record or not.
The former director of ICE, Mr. Hogan, publicly stated that the days of lack of enforcement of immigration laws are over. They should all be scared.
Earlier, if you're in this country illegally and you committed a crime by entering this country, you should be uncomfortable, you should look over your shoulder, and you need to be worried.
Then ICE did something which last 2 administrations had not done. They actually rescinded every single prosecutorial discretion memo dating back till 1973. And apprehending and deporting anyone who comes to your attention became the new policy.
What that's translated to on the street is folks who maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, didn't have to anticipate the possibility of being arrested and deported, now do. We've seen a substantial increase in interest. A lot of stories about the way immigration enforcement unfolds, arrests across the country, families separated, deportations.
Stories about how ICE racially profiles people on the street, picks up immigrants at routine court check-ins, uses contentious surveillance tactics, and makes mass arrests. Some of the journalism does more. Extensive collaborations between news organizations and advocacy groups that have done the research and can show people a thing or 2.
We covered a project that was put together by the Immigrant Defense Project and the Center for Constitutional Rights here in New York City that tracked immigration raids, and it showed a marked increase in operations targeting people with no criminal record. So what we've seen under the Trump administration is a huge increase in arrests. All of these different colors correspond to different types of enforcement activity that was observed. So, like a physical arrest or surveillance or use of force. So we have, 128 cases observed here, 48 here.
I think that generally this kind of ICE-focused reporting can serve one of 2 functions. Either it's basically service journalism, or it can be the kind of traditional accountability journalism. And I think that that latter function is what more of the ICE Watch kind of projects serve. The Marshall Project New York Magazine collaboration was really interesting because it kind of was a mix of the 2. It was grounded in the reports of individual immigration enforcement actions and deportations. And in New York in particular, that's fascinating because seeing the mapping of here is what has actually happened is useful to immigrant New Yorkers who can actually turn the ambient buzz of rumors about what might be happening into a sense of what has actually happened and can navigate their own lives accordingly.
Abolish ICE is the collective name given to a growing movement protesting ICE's new mandate and that of its partner agency, Customs and Border Protection, or CBP. The movement was energized by the release of an audio recording back in June with the sounds of children crying out for their parents. And continues today with the president's constant references to the, quote, threat of the migrant caravan.
The criminals, the smugglers, the trespassers marching toward our border, turn back now because you are not getting in.
Events that have gotten a lot of traction in the mainstream.
She started filming from her
And advocacy groups, not just the media, have suggestions on how to tell the story.
FM 100, KTEX.
I'm headed to a series of workshops organized by Witness near McAllen, Texas. It's a city right on the US-Mexican border. Given the spike in immigration enforcement in this particular valley, the group says it's essential to equip people here with the tools and techniques needed to film events as they happen. This program is a crash course in how video can help immigrant communities expose injustices, advocate for asylum seekers, and defend against deportations. It teaches people not just how to document ICE and Border Patrol abuses, but how to do it safely and ethically.
Our trainings focus on digital security, so how to secure the content on your phone, how to secure your communications, your computers, your social media. We also focus on filming tactics. What should you film? What shouldn't you film?
Aprendí que tengo derecho a filmar cuando estoy viendo que está cometiéndose un abuso. Si él me dice que no continúe una filmación, no continuar, pero sí dejar prendido el audio para poder captar, ¿verdad? Si está pasando algo injusto.
And then a really crucial component of our work is helping people think through strategies around what to do after you film. How you save it and how you preserve it can impact whether or not it can be used as evidence in a court case or a legal proceeding.
If I record something, I would just post it online, but like now I know that there's specific procedures that I should take before posting that.
Workshops like this one are having a real impact on local communities. But the power of citizen video is going well beyond.
Having video footage, having kind of a first-person document is often the difference between something being a local story, if that, and a national story. We've seen in several cases things that were initially posted as Facebook videos becoming things that, you know, national outlets have said in their newsroom, gee, this is getting a lot of play on social media, maybe we should write it up.
A video showing an illegal immigrant being arrested.
ICE agents grab her off the street and try to force her into their
recent arrest, which is getting a lot of attention.
The new technology has become extremely important in your legal defense. For ICE, an unauthorized immigrant is a lawbreaker. For the advocates of that unauthorized person, he or she is not just a lawbreaker, which is true, but he or she is also a parent, he or she is also a contributing member of the community, he or she is also someone who has roots in this place. They want to portray that aspect of the person, and these tools have become very important in making that happen.
Remember Juan Hernandez, the mechanic in LA arrested at work? The entire incident was captured on the shop's surveillance cameras, footage that was used by his defense in court. And that video taken by Romulo Avlica Gonzalez's daughter on her cell phone, that footage went viral, helping him out of immigrant detention 6 months later. Breaking the ice, one video at a time.
And finally, back to social media and a bohemian blast from the past, Reversioned. The birth of the music video is often traced back to Queen and the song Bohemian Rhapsody, produced in 1975, 6 years before the launch of MTV. Both the song and the video became iconic. Dustin Axios, an American of Samoan descent, has reworked the video, turning it into a cutting commentary on online trolling culture, the stuff that we say we don't want to engage in, but they started it. Since the original version of the song drew strongly from the individualism of bohemian artists, it's a fitting soundtrack to the self-obsessed digital age that we live in today. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
It's just sometimes
Exchanges online get me. Maybe we could discuss this together offline. You mean tough face to face, are you out of your mind? That's crazy. You're still stuck in the 80s. I've gotta log out, just gotta log right out of here. We should love each other, although we disagree. Your opinion matters, especially when it sounds just like me.